My name is Geoff, and I'm very happy to be here today to speak to my fellow Toastmasters and most welcome guests on the topic of communication styles. And as a note, this is my first speech in the Level 2 of Pathways program, and Pathways program is part of Toastmasters educational program. It's very valuable resources for learning leadership styles and communication styles, so please check it out. And I know everyone here who's in Toastmasters has the opportunity to benefit from Pathways. So my speech today will be about communication styles. In particular, I'll be talking about three aspects of effective communication: communicating with yourself in the present, communicating with yourself in the future, and then finally communicating with others. Because I think communicating with one's own self is, even though it's a very important part of communicating, it's not something that's often discussed. But first of all, before I dive into those three areas, I'd like to talk about what is effective communication to begin with. And in my view, effective communication starts with a thought. You think of something that you want to say, or you want other people to know, or something that you want to tell yourself. And now, how do you send the message? When I'm a software developer, I'm thinking about often how do different components communicate? How can we send a message from one piece of software to another piece of software? It's often very similar for communicating with yourself or with other people, and I'll get into that in the next few slides. Thirdly, how does that message get interpreted? Does someone understand the message the same way that you sent it, or do they interpret it slightly differently? And ultimately, you want to build a mental model in the recipient of what you're trying to communicate. And the mental model is up to that person or who is receiving it to build in their own mind. So is that mental model synchronized with what you thought you were sending to begin with? This is why communicating is also very interesting and opens up lots of avenues for misinterpretation as well, if the mental model that's created is not exactly what you thought it was. But first of all, I'd like to talk about communicating with yourself. Now, we communicate with ourselves in many ways, but the way I'd like to talk about right now is how do we talk to ourselves in the present? I'd like to do a bit of a poll for the audience here. Can you raise your hand if, when you think in your mind, do you actually hear yourself talking to your own voice? Like, do you hear a little inner voice in your head that's your own thoughts? I'm curious how many people do that. So I can't see everyone. Some people say yes. Maybe more than half do, which is very interesting. I am one of those people. I often hear my own little voice talking to myself in my head, and it's not like super interactive. Like I can't like talk back to the voice, but I do hear that inner thought, inner dialogue that happens. So that's very interesting. Everyone has a different way of thinking and how that appears in their head. And then secondly, how does your past experiences shape how you talk to yourself? For example, if you've recently read an interesting book, would some of those ideas from the book influence some of your own thoughts and that inner voice in yourself? And finally, are you encouraging? Do you give yourself supportive self-talk, or is that voice trying to discourage you or criticize you? Think about how does that voice impact your own feeling about yourself. I do see some people commenting in the chats. Oh, okay, never mind. That's fine. Monica said something. So next, about examples of self-talk. Now, these are some parts of self-talk that I think are very valuable to have, to tell yourself that you're good enough, that you're enough, that you are important, that you're valued, that you're not perfect, but you can be open to feedback, and that you're making a valuable contribution, and that you also will spend time not just for other people, but on yourself. So if you hear your own inner voice saying some of these things, I think it's a very positive effect. And if you hear your inner voice saying, say, more negative things, how can you encourage that voice to be more positive for yourself? This comes down to, for many people, a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself that you're lonely, that you don't have any friends, and that you have trouble making friends. I had a friend who was like this. She was always telling herself that she was so lonely and not very good at making friends, that attitude kind of repelled people who wanted to be her friend. She just kind of pushed people away because she was listening so much to this self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is definitely something to watch out for. Next, about communicating with your future self. Now, this is something I'm pretty much obsessed with. I want to communicate with my future self and coach my future self to do things that in the present I believe are the right things to do. One example of this is if you know you're going to wake up in the morning and you might forget to bring your bag with you when you're going. One thing you can do to communicate with your future self is to put that bag by the front door so that when you walk by, you'll just say, oh, there it is, and you pick it up and you can leave your house with the bag. This is a very simple example of how you can put something by the door to communicate with your future self. You don't have to put it by the door. You can also put it in a trusted system or a trusted list that you know you will check every day. And if you do this, it's almost like you can program your future self to do certain behaviors or achieve certain goals. Every week, I have a reminder that I set for myself that says, plan which day I'm going to cook this week. And when that comes up, I look at my calendar and I schedule a day when I'm going to make a delicious meal, and I even choose the recipe and I plan to go shopping to buy the ingredients. So I also do this for my exercise. I usually plan a day I want to go out for a walk or for a run, and I make sure I stick to that goal. So communicating with yourself is a great way to set goals and make sure you achieve what you want to achieve in your life. Now finally, communicating with others. Now, when communicating with other people, I would say listening is half the picture or even more than half the picture. I once said that we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth because we should listen twice as much as we speak. I don't know if that's the reason we have 2 ears. Maybe it's so we can hear in stereo or something, but it is definitely nice to think about. Listening is really important when you're communicating with other people. One time I took an acting class and the acting teacher was telling the students, when you hear the other actor speaking to you, try to listen to them and then make your facial reaction go along with what you're hearing and how your character would react to hearing what you're hearing. And listening is definitely a very important part of communicating. Another part is about allowing space for other people to speak. That's something we do really well in Toastmasters, is that we give opportunity for other people to speak and we give them our attention in return. And we share that attention to help each other improve. When you're communicating, you should also know your audience really well and tailor your message to your audience. That means being aware of the recipient's beliefs, values, and ideas. When I first started working as a software developer, I had a lot of trouble communicating with other people because I really didn't know how they interpreted what I was saying, and I didn't really have much exposure to different ways of communicating that were very effective. So over time, after having the opportunity to work with and study with many smart people, I kind of picked up these different styles and different techniques and a sense of what is a good communication style, especially for a technical audience. And now I feel like I'm much better at communicating. Another example was when I used to talk to people at parties or social events. After speaking to someone for 30 seconds, I would find that I'd be very disappointed that they would just walk away. And I was like, why are they walking away? Am I not an interesting person? But it was mainly just how I was presenting myself and maybe how I gave my eye contact and different ways of communicating. I wasn't really familiar with that, and it was very frustrating. But through Toastmasters, that's something I've also improved a lot as well. So some final tips about communicating. I think it's important to know that everyone has a unique style and personality. And so when you're communicating, unless you're like Tony Robbins, who is speaking to a stadium of 10,000 people, it's a good idea to tailor your speech to your audience. And when you're communicating or doing anything in life, try to focus on the intersection of what you're interested in, what you're good at, and what the world needs. So I definitely find being true to yourself means focusing on what you want to do and then letting other people come to you who are attracted to your style. And by broadcasting your interests through speeches or writing blogs or posting on Facebook or talking to people about different ideas, you can let people know what you're interested in, so people who are kind of your crowd and people who share those interests can come to you, and you can kind of have a group of people who support you and also you support them. So in conclusion, I'd like to kind of give a recap of what I talked about. What are you telling yourself in the present? What are those self-talk? Even if you don't hear an inner voice, how do you think about yourself, and what are some of the ways that you describe your own personality and your own strengths and weaknesses? And then secondly, how do we talk to our future selves? How can we learn better from our past selves and also coach ourselves in the future to do things that we understand to be good things for us to do? And finally, how can we listen better and speak to others better so we can work together more effectively? So that wraps up my speech for today. I hope this was helpful to give you a bit of framework to think about communication in slightly different ways from typically we think about it. And next time you do communicating, try to be aware of some of these ideas and see if you can put them into practice to make your communicating more effective. So now I'll turn it back to our Toastmaster. Thank you very much, Johnny, and thanks to everyone for watching.
Thank you, Geoff. That was a very engaging and informative speech.